So time for us to move on to panel 3, which is Innovation, R&D, and the Birth of Breakthroughs. Great pleasure to introduce Lord David Pryor, who I got to know very well during the pandemic when he was chair of NHS England. So David, good to see you, and I'll let you introduce your panel. Thank you.
Right, I think we'll kick off. Look, we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm not going to go through lots of introductions, but just following on from the last talk, I'm just going to ask Jane, just kick off. I mean, how is AI going to change what you do at Alchemab?
Well, what we do at Alchemab is antibody drug discovery, but we do it in a different way. So we are trying to find antibodies that are associated with disease resilience. So we start with the natural immune system, which in my view is one of the best AI computer programs on the planet, actually. It protects us so well. We find antibodies associated with disease protection. And then the challenge we have is trying to understand what they're binding to. So we're kind of turning drug discovery on its head. So we use very, very large data sets. We've got a lot of sequence information on all antibody sequences associated with both disease and wellness, and we try and interpret that, which is a really, really significant question, and we use proteomics and structural biology as well. So I think for us, AI is it's a partner to the lab-based work that we're doing. We use it to make predictions and then go back and test them and see if they're working and try and work out where our antibodies might be binding in similar paratopes and how they might be developed. So it's fundamental to what we do, but we see it very much as partnering with experimental and intellectual input in terms of how we're triaging. But I do think, Miles made the point at the end, that AI is coming. I think the key thing is understanding where it's best used and how we actually use it in creative ways, and in some ways to improve productivity as well as innovation. So I think it's a massive opportunity. But so
thanks. And Matthias from Merck, has it arrived in Big Pharma?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, great pleasure to be here. Yeah, thanks for putting together such an excellent panel. I mean, look, the way how I like to think about it is that we have at the moment arrived in the age of co-pilot. Yeah, so it's kind of human and AI working together on problems. It may move towards something else, as we just have also heard, and I think that is how we approach it really from a larger pharmaceutical corporation perspective. So, of course, AI and drug discovery is a big thing for us. Yeah? Not only, let's say, to find hopefully technological solutions to drug the undruggable, yeah, but also literally to, from a European standpoint, to, let's say, arrive at a really competitive way in terms of time and cost to deal with other competing, let's say, political systems around the world that just simply follow different rules than we do. So we ended actually in a couple of partnerships over the last, I want to say, 6-7 months. Yeah, Accenture, UK-based company, I think very well known to everybody here. Benevolent AI, Caris, we did a deal recently with, and in the coming days and weeks, we will kind of announce one more. Yeah, for the time being. So you can see, I think, with that we are really we are on it. That's the one thing. The other thing is, and for us it was when we started that endeavor kind of really 4 or 5 years ago, it was the kind of insight, which is not groundbreakingly new, but it literally takes a lot of effort to clean up your data sets. Yeah, so that at the end, to use this example, that the data of your PCR cycle can speak at the end with commercial data from country organizations in Pakistan. Yeah? And that is something what we call the data autobahn, which is really, it's a bit of a fancy term, but what it does is that we are synchronizing, let's say, the different data sources so that with the right interfaces, think about like ChatGPT-like versions, yeah, these data sets can, on a press of a button, really interrogated by all people. And the idea behind it really is that we want to kind of turn a little bit around the paradigm almost, if you wish, from a time investment perspective, that if we ask a certain questions to teams for data that should exist, right, typically it may take 70 or 80% of the time for people to aggregate the data and then spend, let's say, another 20% to think about solutions. We want to turn that around, that you really have the data available. And that's true for everything. It's true for biomarker data, it's true for clinical data, it's true for commercial questions. So to really change the way how we approach at the end problems.
Good. I just wanted to have that brief discussion following on from Miles's presentation from isomorphic, which I thought was really interesting. So now to get back to where we would have begun at the beginning, I'm just going to ask the four panelists, just in their last 20, 25 years of their sort of business lives, what breakthroughs have there been that have really impacted human health? I'm going to start with you, Tamsin.
Wow, that's a big question. So I for those of you who don't know me, I've started a company called Population Health Partners, which tries to set drug companies up going after the big drivers of disease. And before that, I was a policy wonk, and I did health policy for the UK government. And I think one of the big changes that I've seen over my working lifetime, which I'm hugely excited about, is that whereas sort of 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have interventions to support the big drivers of disease, now suddenly they are coming to market. I mean, we've all heard about the GLP-1s and the anti-obesity medicines, but there are also some really exciting products coming down the track for blood pressure, which is very exciting, and obviously there's been cardiovascular medicines that have come to market in the recent years. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is that about 12 years ago I worked for Public Health England, and it felt like mostly all we had was the ability to say, drink less, eat better, and run round the block, please. And the thing is, if you look at the data, that didn't really work, and we really tried to tell everyone to do that, but it didn't work. So my big excitement comes from the fact that I'm starting to see now a combination of behavioural interventions coupled with some therapeutic interventions that I really hope will shift the dial. And to just tag on to that, I think the advances in AI and the ability to be able to predict people's individual disease trajectories will also add another really important layer onto this idea of intervening in large-scale diseases. You might not want to tell my 10-year-old that he's going to have heart disease. You can definitely tell him to run around the block more, but we can start to look at his health trajectory and think about when we might need to intervene. So in fact, we can sort of, intervene before the disease has happened. And I think that is really exciting, very futuristic, and so that's my innovation breakthrough.
Yeah, and low-cost diagnostics are going to come into this, aren't they, in a big way?
I agree.
I think as well.
I agree.
So, Joep, from your perspective, again, just say a little bit about what you do, and then biggest breakthrough you've seen.
Yeah, happy to. My name is Joep Muijrers. I'm with Gilde Healthcare. Since we don't have a presence in the UK, I'll give you a bit of background on what Gilde is. We're one of the larger investors in Europe, manage around 2.5 billion euros. We've been around for about 25 years. We focus exclusively on innovation in healthcare, which we define as therapeutics, medical devices, and health tech diagnostics. On top of that, we focus on things that provide better care at lower cost. I will come back to that because it's not a marketing slogan. Particularly the lower cost may not be something you hear every day from investors. I will come back to that. Okay, breakthroughs. There's a lot to choose from, I guess. I remember the time when I was doing my PhD, and to be honest, we still had like glass plates to sequence with radioactivity, that kind of stuff, right? And we had small molecules, and monoclonals were coming up. Look at what we have today. So you're asking me a pretty impossible question here. I'm still going to go with one thing, and that is probably our capacity to precisely manipulate the genome. I have a reason for that. Not because CRISPR-Cas today has such a profound therapeutic impact yet, but it has enabled a lot of the other things. It has enabled gene therapy. It has enabled, I would imagine, very precise monoclonals, ADCs. It has enabled a whole bunch of things that today provide treatment opportunities to patients and to diseases where nothing is possible. It will have a very profound impact in your line of activity as well, like the larger disease, I'm 100% sure. So if you force me, I would choose that. Having said all of that, and maybe that's another thing we can come back to, what is impact? And this comes back to better care, lower cost, right? Because if we create something which is not made available in a reasonable way to the patient community, what is the impact? I mean, I've never really understood that, and I look forward to talking more about that.
So Jane, I guess you're going to have to choose monoclonal antibodies. And maybe a little bit about the work you did with Greg Winter as well.
Yeah, so my background is antibody drug discovery and development, which I've been doing for nearly 30 years now, probably, 30 years. And so when I started, so I worked with at a company called Cambridge Antibody Technology with Greg Winter, and we were sort of building the first human antibody phage display libraries, which was just a wonderful platform to then create antibodies that could be applied in all sorts of different disease settings. But when I started, there was only one antibody approved, so that was OKT3 for transplant rejection. It was basically a mouse antibody. As I was sort of joining CAT, there was actually quite a high-profile FDA kind of failure to approve. I don't know if people remember that, but Centoxin, which was an anti-sepsis antibody, which everyone thought would get through, and they sort of opened the floodgates, was turned down. And it was turned down for all sorts of reasons, and I think those sort of defined the challenges, if you like, of where we needed to go with antibody discovery, because there were challenges around manufacturing, cost of goods, understanding patient stratification and treatment pathways and speed of diagnosis. And that was a big wake-up call, I'd say. But I think the industry learned from that. And if you fast forward to where we are now, there's, I'm not sure the exact number of approved antibodies. It's certainly getting up for 200. And we're starting to see what I really like now is the sort of antibody derivatives being approved, bispecifics, ADCs. It's spawned a whole plethora of different approaches for treatments. And the treatments are now applied across oncology, but also autoimmune, infectious disease, checkpoint inhibitors, again, another Nobel Prize winning, fantastic breakthrough. So I think antibodies have delivered on the promise commercially, sort of, I think 50% of the highest commercial drugs were antibodies a couple of years ago, but also billions of patients now, and for me that's really amazing that we're seeing so much progress in terms of using antibodies, starting to use them in combination, starting to use them with small molecules. So I think that's been incredible. There's a lot more that we need to do in how we turn the benefits of some of these therapeutics into consistent cures. We're now seeing some monoclonals now being approved for neurodegeneration as well, and that's an area where I think there's massive need, and we should probably have a conversation about as well. But yeah, it's been a very rewarding 25 years in biologics discovery, and hopefully there's more to come. So.
Matthias?
If I may, I would answer the question in a non-scientific way, because when I was also thinking about it, right? I mean, science saved the day so many times in the last years. Think about mRNA vaccines. Think at the moment on the GLP-1 story, right? Think about checkpoint inhibitors. You mentioned it. Yeah, it's really tough to choose. And when I was thinking, what's the underlying theme? I forgot CRISPR to mention, of course. Yeah. I think it's really us as Europeans, and I hope it's okay if I say Europeans here in the UK, yeah, because the majority of these kind of breakthroughs came originally from this continent. Yeah, if you think about it, at least partly from the idea, or at the end, somebody that really drove the development. And that drove me then to the insight that I think one of the biggest breakthroughs, and sometimes maybe at least I take it too much for granted, was that there were a lot of people that were forging really a functional ecosystem. And I not only mean this in an industry-wide fashion, but really also in a localized way. If you think about the Golden Triangle here, Cambridge, Oxford, London, if you think about even areas like Shanghai, Boston, South San Francisco, maybe also to a certain extent Munich, I think that is really what drove, I think, a lot of these breakthroughs. The proximity of literally high-class academic innovation with investors that were willing kind of to fund early-stage ideas, with also a lot of good service providers that helped actually to professionalize a lot of these steps along the way, and then also, last but not least, pharma companies and larger biotech organizations like ours that took then these ideas and drove them into clinical development and commercial infrastructure. And if you look a little bit broader also, I think sometimes we all underappreciate that regulators also allow us still, to have such a functioning ecosystem, because of course it has some downsides. If you think about the latest FTC debates that we're having on mergers and acquisitions, yeah, we need to be aware of it. Competition is something good, yeah, but I think the way how this ecosystem works and how we kind of are able to really drive innovation, that is a breakthrough in itself, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to answer the question I posed by coming up with whole genome sequencing, the work that Shankar did at Cambridge. And so in the answer to the European, I think you're absolutely right, was about Europe, but you could almost, I mean, the work done at Cambridge, I mean, I'm biased, of course, I've been at Cambridge myself, but if you look at the whole field of genomics, extraordinary concentration around Cambridge. So if we look forward then, I mean, you often hear that we're living in a golden age of science, a golden age of biology, really. Do you think that the infrastructure in Europe and the wider ecosystem, by which I mean the healthcare system and the financial system, is going to enable Europe to retain this kind of lead in science as we look forwards? Or are we inevitably going to see it moving to Boston, to Shanghai, and to other places as well? How do you see it from your perspective as an investor?
Yeah, sure. No, science is excellent in Europe, there's no doubt about it. And indeed, some of the biggest breakthroughs came out of Europe. But it's also a fact that we are a dwarf compared to the US in terms of the funding that's available. There's a lot of segmentation, particularly on the early stage side of things. There's too few investors with sizable enough budgets to back these companies. There's a huge gap. There tends to be quite a bit of money in the early seed phases, and then less so as you go towards a more larger funding need. There's a big gap there. Many entrepreneurs who get stuck there, the death valley, that we even have a word for it these days. But I'm still optimistic about Europe, very much so. And it's not just because that's where we deploy most of our assets. We do so by choice. And the reason for that is, and this also comes back to, I think, the role investors should play. I mean, the obvious one that everybody, I guess, knows about investors is that we back these things, right? We provide funding, we take a lot of risk doing so, and then if it goes well, we make a good return. Good. But maybe there's more to it. Maybe we as investors should realize what our role is in the ecosystem. And that has, I don't know if people agree with that, but that has not been good enough. And I look at myself as well, having been an investor for quite some time now. I think the solution might lie in the following, and we try to do this at Gilde. Realize that we as investors are very demanding of how we deploy our capital. Realize that the total amount of funding that's being deployed by investors dwarfs any large pharma R&D's budget. It's huge. So with that comes responsibility. And I think here in Europe we're very forward thinking. I really believe so. In that we're part of an ecosystem. We get to be very decisive about which assets get developed at a certain stage in time. So if we openly cooperate, and I'll tell you later about how we do this at Gilde, with some of the other key stakeholders, regulatory, payers, HDAs, patient side, you know, I think there's a lot to be done because the base is so solid. The science in Europe is there. It's just a matter of, is there a differentiated way in which we can advance this science into products that are relevant to patients? I'll give you the cliffhanger. We work with some of the best people that we could identify on the planet to help us with this, but we'll get to that, I guess.
So we have great people, we have great science, but we don't have scaled up big companies. And Tamsin, this is an issue that you've been looking at. You know, so much of the capital that comes here is from the US and not from Europe. I mean, some is from Europe, clearly, but so much from the US. And so many British companies end up moving to Boston or San Francisco. You've looked at this for a number of years. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lived experience, I guess, over the past 4 years, because the company Population Health Partners is based in the US and in the UK. And to your point, there is great science here, and we have actually worked with a lot of companies and assets that have come from the UK. But because the money comes from the US, what unfortunately happens, and it's a very human, real thing, if you are working with people and the money is over in the US, the company slowly migrates there. No matter how much you try and sort of keep things spread, it's just you sort of end up with the gravitational pull. It's the network that people want to work with. It's the fact that they want the factory near their house so they can go there regularly. It's very human business operational things that will pull us over there. Notwithstanding, we ultimately are going to end up floating on the Nasdaq. So I think there are some structural changes that we could make in the UK in our financial system that would help. But I think we have to recognize that business operates a certain way, and if we want to keep and retain businesses here, we not only need the financial institutions to do it, we need the checks to be written here, but there's something else that we need here as well, and that's all the operations that are required to run our businesses well through that scale and growth phase. So one of the troubles I've had recently is around clinical research, which I have to say is very sad for me, having spent many years working on trying to improve the clinical research infrastructure here for late-stage clinical trials within the UK, because we have so many assets that we all know and love, such as the NHS and single records and things like that. But it's easier for us to run trials in the US as well, sadly, because the infrastructure is better, the setup time is quicker. All of these things that I know we can change, but somehow the change is not happening. But I would love nothing more for our UK assets to stay and grow in the UK, or our European assets to stay and grow in Europe.
So anyone here who's got close relations with the next government, whoever that may be,
Put your hand up.
We've got to get British financial institutions, pension funds, insurance companies to invest in risk British assets. Otherwise, we're going to lose all this science, and the pensioners of this country will get no benefit from it. So, I mean, I don't know whether you can talk a little bit, Jane, if you can't say so, but you've been doing a fundraising recently. Just could you give us your perspectives of the discussions you've had with various investors? It's Series A, I think, is it, or Series B? Or
Well, no, so we did a Series A a couple of years ago, which was, so the funding for Alchemab originally actually is a very innovative funding from SV and Dementia Discovery Fund as the sort of core seed funders. And I think what I really like around the UK is the ability to work with investors who really understand the science and are prepared to take some risk in terms of setting up, really kind of relatively technically risky startups, but with bold ideas. So I think that was great, and I think that's been a fabulous experience. And then we did well to raise Series A, which some which money came from the US. We now have a lab in the US. It's a very productive lab, and that's working well. But I can see, as Tamsin says, as we start moving to the clinic, some of the indications that we're sort of thinking about, it's going to be easier to recruit in the US. I think the sort of balance, though, is there's a very strong understanding that the R&D base in the UK and Europe is very strong, that the science is very strong. And over my sort of 20-odd years now, sort of being part of this ecosystem, I think wherever the money comes from, there's a commitment to quality R&D in the UK, so I think that's actually a really significant step forward, and I feel very confident that, our investors want us to thrive from an R&D perspective in the UK. The challenge is the practicalities that Tamsin describes of when you then do need to get to that next stage with the clinical trials and the regulatory interactions and the manufacturing. How do you handle that? So I think, and it is really important that we get UK pension funds investing in the UK and in Europe. But I think we do need to solve some of those practical infrastructure issues as well. And I'm not quite sure how we do that.
We'll probably come back to that a little later on. But just tell me, do we see Big Pharma as an engine of innovation? Or do we see them essentially as a buyer of external innovation?
Yeah. Look, I think it always depends how you look at it, and of course different companies are differently structured. Yeah, but I think in general, if you look at the industry as a whole, the truth is we're wasting too much money. The cost that it takes to bring a drug to market, and also the parallel approaches that we're taking. I mean, what was I reading? Over 100 GLP-1s being developed these days. I mean, it's insane. Yeah, it is just insane. I'm not talking that we should change our political system to a centralized approach. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah, but I think we as industry just need to get better, and that is why I personally am really a really big believer in this ecosystem thinking. Yeah, and I think if you look at the classical roles these days, a bit stereotyping. Yeah, but it is that the real true cutting edge innovation, as I said earlier, is done in academia. That is then translated via investors into biotech setups, and that at a certain point when it really requires global scale and more of a, I want to say, very diligent and very compliant and regulatory compliant way to develop these drugs and commercialize them on a press of a button, more or less, in 100 countries around the world, that is something that pharma companies are really, really good at. And I think that is also where, for us as Europeans, again, a big chance lies, because I think we all feel, without getting too political, that there's a little bit of a rivalry going on between the US and China. It may always was, but if you look at recent developments with the Biosecure Act, it reaches a new quality now, right? And, we are proud Europeans and we love to source innovation from Europe, but at the same time, we need to go where the best science is that fits our actual needs. So to give you an example, last year we licensed in 4 clinical stage assets, and all of them but one came from China. That was not the plan, right? But it was just at that point in time what made most sense for us. And why did it make sense for the Chinese players? So one of the companies we partnered with was Hengrui. So they are the largest pharmaceutical company in China, actually. It made sense to them because they, of course, see that these kind of geopolitical tensions are building up, and they see that they may end up having difficulties commercializing and developing their trials on a global scale. So they look for somebody that can help them. And there, I think Europe has a very unique chance. It's not only true for, let's say, larger corporations like ours, but I think it's true for every grade of company out there to source that. And the reciprocal is also true, right? I think also a lot of biotechs we talk with in the US, they see more and more that not only that they don't have the capabilities, but also that they feel that political tension to develop assets out of the US market, not only in Europe, but especially also in Asia Pacific. Yeah, and there I would really wish that, and somebody said, that there's the force missing to push the UK pension funds into these investments. I know too little about UK pension funds, I must admit, but at the end of the day, I think sometimes it also requires a change of framing for people to make that move ultimately. So I could see that, and again, we all wish that it's not escalating further, but if, let's say, that tension stays where it is or grows further, that we as Europeans really need to make that step forward, and kind of invest into our own countries, because there will be less and less opportunities by capital control mechanisms to do otherwise.
Could I add an optimistic note? Because I don't want to sound pessimistic here. The last few rounds that we did were with European investors only. This was good.
Great.
A lot of money still available in Europe. I think I like your point about the ecosystem, and that's what we try to replicate. So I told you, better care, lower cost. What does that mean? When we do an investment, we have what we call an impact council. The impact council is chaired by a gentleman called Guido Raggi, who's probably well known to you as a former EMA commissioner. Carol Longson, well known to you, sits on this council, some other people. They will help us assess, is this really better care? Is it really lower cost from every stakeholder perspective? Now, this is something, to our knowledge, that has not been replicated in the US. Yes, there's a lot of money. There's also a lot of short-termism with most of the investors that I see in the US. So maybe we look at this from an ecosystem perspective. When we invest in the company, we want it to be better care. And what do we mean by better care? Not just for the clinician, or the word KOL, which I hate, as if smart people get their opinion led. Let's call it a clinician. Patient, the patient perspective, absolutely crucial. We heard it this morning. I mean, very simple. Dear company, if you ignore the patient perspective, just know that the FDA, the EMA, pretty much every HTA, increasing amount of payers, will take this very seriously. So all we're saying is, dear company, think about this before it's too late, right? And now this comes from the investor side. This may be the only, because a lot of this is known to a lot of you, this comes from the investor side. We're pushing this. And the people who syndicate with us like this. Pension funds you mentioned. We just raised our latest fund at the end of last year. 4 large pension funds invested. They're not British. And they hadn't done so for a while. So there's hope, right? It's just a matter of how do you position yourself? How do you engage? What do you want? I mean, don't get me wrong, we are a for-profit investor. If we don't make returns on our investments, that's it. That's the end of Gilde. But we think the two can go hand in hand. If I look back at some investments I've been part of that have done very well, both in terms of impact and in terms of return, it's always the same. If you can get a product with a big unmet need, as defined quite often by the end user, typically the patient, across the finish line, at a level where it's actually reimbursed, and that's a lot of ifs, right? A lot of blah, blah. But if you can do that, you don't have to worry about the return, let me tell you. I mean, there's many examples that we have. So sometimes it's just a matter of realizing that we're in a very rich hunting ground in UK and Europe, but maybe positioning yourself slightly differently. And honestly, working with some of these people I mentioned, we've only been doing this for a couple of years. It's unbelievable the amount you can learn. I'm a simple investor, what do I know? But people like that, the perspectives they give to our portfolio companies as well, to have the interaction to get a perspective on regulatory questions or payer questions early enough so you can still make modifications. Look, let me stop patting myself on the back. We're just telling you, if you can be in a position where you do something differently, there's a lot of opportunity also here in Europe, UK. I'm an investor, I have to be an optimist, right? But let me just make sure people don't get depressed from this.
So look, can
I add one thing, because I don't want to be put here as a pessimist. It wasn't meant that way.
Yeah, that's my role.
Exactly. I mean, what you said, I think, about this market access pricing perspective, it resonates very, very well with me. And I want to go thus far to say that when we look at new opportunities from wherever they come, of course, we're a scientific-driven company. We look at science first, but equally we look at the question, will we have access and will we be able to get prices for it? Because that's, I think, the problem also we are all facing, that the rigor is increasing around the globe. Healthcare systems need to save money or spend money differently, right? And how can you ensure that you can have innovation that allows to have a step innovation approach rather than an incremental innovation approach, which, by the way, was a big success story if you think about the last 10 years of oncology research. But it was a success story because payer systems around the globe reimbursed all of us for it to invest it into the next round of innovation. Yeah? And I think there you see at the moment a really clear tectonic shift towards really more the younger, more the chronic patients. So think about immunology, urology, where you see actually that parts of the funds are being reallocated. You know? We did, and I'm not telling you a secret here, yeah, we continuously monitor literally the companies that have clinical stage assets. And you were wondering, I don't know if anybody of you did that search lately, yeah? If you look at companies in immunology that have a kind of bolt-on category, 3 to 5 billion EV, there don't exist many around the globe. And the reason is literally that the majority of the investments in the last 10 years, globally speaking, R&D, venture capital, was going into oncology. There you find a plethora of those. So it will take some time to build up literally these, let's say, a little bit more advanced companies in that sector. But I'm personally really, really hopeful about that.
Okay, well, look, you're both optimistic. I mean, if we look at the state of the National Health Service at the moment, and Munir was on the board of NHS England when I was there, I mean, the system is completely broken. You've got 7.5 million people on waiting lists. You've got inequality rising. If you're poor, you're going to die 10 years, 15 years before people who are rich. So the system here is not working. In the US, it is clearly not working. It's totally unaffordable in the US. And most of the continental systems are under pressure. And yet we've got genomes now, $100 for a whole genome. We've got biologics. We've got cell and gene therapies. But they're not even touching the sides of population health. So Tamsin, how are we going to sort this out?
Oh my goodness gracious me. So I've got to be optimistic about this terrible state of affairs and give you a solution to, I think, what is one of the most pressing problems for governments all around the world. I'm not here to plug his book, but it's going to sound like I am. I've just been reading Andrew Scott's The Longevity Imperative, which is sort of one of those real aha moments where I was like, yes, society is getting older, which means that we are all, when we're in our prime, our maximum economic units is also, unfortunately, at the same period of time when we're all actually starting to collect our first few chronic conditions. So we're starting to wake up to the fact that, yeah, actually we really, really need to maintain our health if we're going to maintain our economy. And that's a really important thing. And the problem is, if you start late, then it's already too late. So she would say this, wouldn't she, because she has a company called Population Health Partners, that prevention is genuinely the answer. And so I think prevention will reduce the demand on the healthcare system and make it easier for the healthcare systems to focus on what they do, which is really treating illness. And it's really important that they're given the space and time to be able to do this well, because that's what they're good at. So who manages prevention then? Well, I think it's everybody has to manage their own prevention journey. And I think we need to see a democratization of health, and it's no longer in the hands of doctors, it's in the hands of numerous professionals, but it's also in our hands. So we need to own our own data, we need to own our own risk factors, and we need to take care of our health before it's too late. And that sounds really hard, but I am really optimistic with all of the enabling technologies and therapeutics, information, digital apps, wearables. I bet half the room has got an Oura Ring or a Apple Watch. I think we will see this happen, and I think we're starting to feel the pressure economically. And I can't think of the saying where you sort of when needs must, or necessity is the mother of all inventions. So I think we will see that change, and I think it will help our healthcare system too.
Yeah, and I just give you a personal opinion that public health has got to be done outside the sickness system. If you try and get public health done by the NHS, it will be a disaster, because the NHS is fundamentally run by big hospitals. And that is the last place you want to deliver health. That's the last place you need to be. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, but...
I think so, and I think it's a good thing, because I think it's sort of, you can't keep putting pressure on the NHS. It's just not fair.
Yeah.
There's a better way of doing it, and I think the fog's clearing, and we can see what that looks like, and let's do it.
I mean, I think sort of billing it as prevention sort of implies, the progression to disease. And I don't know, my sort of recent experience with Alchemab, where we're trying to understand why people are well rather than ill, which is sort of resonates exactly with what David and Tamsin are saying here. And understanding wellness and preserving wellness, it's sort of almost not, and I think you can do that using all sorts of digital tools, all sorts of integrated omics, if we sort of understand that early enough and give people that information early enough. I really do think this is feasible. It's going to take time, but we have to shift it back to maintain wellness and actually maintain quality of wellness. We don't want everybody becoming old with chronic conditions, as you say. But when you say prevention, it automatically triggers therefore you are avoiding disease X. And the other thing that we do, which I think is something we need to change, is this how we categorise diseases is completely counter to how you treat holistic wellness.
Yes.
And I think there's something around the labels that we give patients that is not helpful in terms of their trajectory that we need to change as well. So it's kind of, I don't know how we do that, but I think it's important to flip this.
So I'm going to wrap up in a minute by asking everyone on the panel just to sort of sketch their view of what healthcare would look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time. But before I do, does anyone in the audience like to make any observations or comments before I do that? Yeah.
You said right at the start there about the power of individual predictability, so getting down to the kind of individual human being able to say what happens. In a single payer system, that's enormously powerful, hugely helpful. In an insured model, if you add that predictability, does that make that person an uninsurable risk, and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to guess sort of how that would play out. I mean, I don't know whether insurers would sort of say, oh, well, I've predicted that you're going to get a heart attack, so I'm not going to insure you. But I think if that we have that kind of capability, I think we're going to have to see insurance-based systems respond to that in a way that is acceptable, both to the people who, because they are partly funded by governments as well as funded by consumers and employers. And I think employers employers who manage their own insurance systems in the States need to wake up, and they need to say, this is my workforce. And if I know that somebody is going to get an illness, I would want my healthcare system that I am paying for to cover that intervention. So I think we'll have to see a lot of change in the way that the finances flow, the way the incentives flow. But I think it will all boil down to the fact that, we are an asset, people are an asset. Like, we need to take care of ourselves, and that's important, and the insurance system will catch up to it.
It is actually one of the fortunes of history that actually a capitated system that covers the whole population, like our system in the UK, turns out to be the best kind of system to deliver public health. So I think we're fortunate at that. So I think that the overall architecture of how healthcare is funded in the UK is probably not far off where it should be. It's on the delivery side, of course, is different, but actually it's got to be capitated. There's got to be incentives in the system to keep people well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stuart Jackson. We probably feel a bit odd today because we're well, I think we are anyway, because we're a behaviour change company. We're not a pharma. We're not a. But actually, that session for me has been absolute music to my ears. We've been working across the southwest of England with integrated care and integrated neighbourhood teams as a response to the Clare Full report, amongst many other things, working with NHS England on vaccine take-up, etc. I suppose my question is, or my observation is, yes, I agree. We have to give society back its responsibility, or help enable them to go, I will take better care of myself. I will think about who I am. And you're right, all of the new tests and et cetera coming on are going to help with that. What's my DNA doing to me, or affecting how I live and eat? But how do we, I suppose, change the system? Because I have battled with PCNs, NHS England, who are saying, let's do team of teams, let's do sort of that sort of real low hierarchy stuff, but we're in control. And how do we work more collaboratively together, I suppose, particularly as a very small organisation of 80 people for us?
Well, I mean, you have to start from the beginning, which is the NHS is a public sector monopoly. And any system which is insulated from competition is going to be slow to change. Because if you're a monopoly, preservation is, that is what you do. That is what monopolies do. And so we have to rely upon regulation to drive improvement. And it's always very much a second best. It's why healthcare across the world is probably 20 years behind most industries in adopting new technologies, because competition doesn't work very well, as we see in America. When you do have competition, it doesn't work very well. So I'm afraid we have to accept the fact, I think, that healthcare is always going to be behind, because driving innovation is so difficult in healthcare. And we could spend an hour discussing why it is difficult, but take it from me, it is difficult.
Maybe to add one thought, if I may, I think the one thing how to change systems at the end, it's the toughest thing to do beside changing human behavior, right? So there I have my skepticism also, I must say. But if you look at insulated solutions where that was tried, if you think about the Kaiser Permanentes of this world, yeah, so they use at the end the forces our markets react to. So we are all capitalists. That at least is the system we're in. Yeah. So there's for those of you who are not too familiar with it, at the end there's an end-to-end kind of responsibility, yeah, of a very much vertically integrated healthcare provider, I want to say, for the sake of an easy term, where literally they will do everything they can to identify exposure of people to certain diseases potentially, and then use the right preventative measures. And we all know it, right? If you take a certain cancer drug and apply it not to a stage 4 patients, but to a stage 1 patients, you have 80-90% response rates easily, right? And I think that is unfortunately something that, for reasons that I think also nobody fully understands, at least to my understanding, is not scalable, yeah? But perhaps it's more of a localized community-based system, like, we were all kind of growing up thousands of years ago, right? Maybe that's the answer.
Hi, it's Nathan from CCX. Joep, you talked about the big responsibility that you have as a life science investor in terms of channeling resources and others. I was wondering to what extent are you and others like you focusing on investing in the cutting edge science and then trusting people such as Tamsin to blaze the trails in terms of how do we navigate access for the science? Or to what extent market access risks, as we've been discussing, factor into the investment decisions fundamentally?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We may be a bit of an odd one out because when we invest, that means that we've gone through a whole bunch of channels, i.e., is this really better care from the clinical, from the patient side, cost side, lower cost, right? So if this is going to be, let's say, a drug and it's going to come in at a certain cost, what does it replace? If it's going to come at an extremely high cost and it's supposed to be a one-off, are these companies willing to put their money where their mouth is, i.e. maybe not asking for whatever 3-4 million on day one, but maybe spreading it out a bit as the benefit lasts. I told you some of the people who work with us, they're not easily convinced, but it's unbelievably powerful. All we're asking for is for ourselves as an investor, but also for our portfolio companies, think this through. When you still have the chance to make modifications, go talk to the representative, the HTA and the payers, and see how they may respond when your drug comes to market. And as we know, and as we heard this morning, the regulatory bodies are very open to engage with companies. Now, you don't want to know how few small companies actually do it. We're a small company investor. So as an investor, we're using our leverage to say, go talk to them. Right? What do you have to lose? Sometimes people will say, yeah, I may not like what I hear. What's the bird called? Ostrich, right? That sticks the hand in the sand. I mean, that for me as an investor doesn't really fly, right? But that's what we're asking for. So we are very much focused on if this were to work, what's the impact on the other side? Having said that, nothing is perfect. And again, we are a for-profit investor. If a large company takes out one of my smaller portfolio companies, they're not going to come back to me and say, hey, what did Gilde say about better care, lower cost? But we will do what we can do. We will do what we can do. And we are one of Europe's largest investors, and we're very focused on this because we see the value it brings. We see how our portfolio companies benefit from this. I'll give you one, and I can talk about this for a long time. I'll give you one concrete example. There was a regulatory question, and via Guido, Razi, we were able to get some perspectives. It's eye-opening, and something that seemed like a mainstream development program was turned around and went somewhere else. Now, I'm very happy we did that at the point in time when we could still shift and weren't in a pivotal trial to find out that, this is going completely the wrong way. Like, that's not a replica of the Titanic, but you know what I mean? It's kind of, you don't want to be on that thing. So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, that's all we're asking for. Get these perspectives on time when you can still make changes. Realizing there's limitations to it, but that's our solution. I'm not sure that every investor does that, but at least that's what we do.
We'll take two more questions. Yeah, one here in front of me. Yeah.
So, name is Zubi Kemefuna from Morehouse, and this question is directed primarily to Matthias, but anybody else who wants to answer can do so. So, making reference to your comment around the fragmentation of the innovation landscape, you used GLP-1 as an example. My question to you is, on the one hand, do you see, and before the question, presumably the idea is that when there is more collaboration, if you like, or more concerted deployment of resources, there's greater efficiency, right? Then you're working together within the ecosystem. So on the one hand, do you see that actually realistically happening in the future, and how would you get there? And then on the other hand, how do you balance that with the role of competition in driving innovation?
Yeah. So maybe I answer the first question first. That's the easier question. Yeah. So look, from my perspective, even today, the boundary between a classical investor and a large biotech organization is already very blurry. Yeah, I'll give you an example. 3 years ago, I started an initiative to kind of generate 6, 7, 8 newcos where we put our assets in. I mean, we are an anchor investor, if you wish. We have skin in the game. We're holding equity. Yeah? But at the end of the day, we decided for ourselves that, yes, we believe in these assets, but we're not the right company to develop it because it needs other minds, or it was a tricky path, whatever. And these are good companies. You think about Müllenbeck Therapeutics, Vera Therapeutics, IDRX. There's again a number of other ones that are in stealth mode. Yeah, so that works for us very well, and I think that is one of the prime examples. The other prime example that immediately comes to mind, of course, is diagnostics. Yeah, if you think about companion diagnostics, again, not many people realize it for whatever reason, but with Roche together, we are also the pioneers of companion diagnostics. Yeah, kind of Erbitux requires EGFR receptor testing. Yeah, so there I think you see a lot of these collaborations happening, and of course everybody needs to get a fair share from a value perspective. That's a given, I think, from a value system. Yeah, to enter into these partnerships, and there may be many more of that, but hopefully that answers the question. The other question, of course, is much more tricky to answer. And look, I'm speaking now as a private person here, yeah, to be very clear. You need to find that balance, because I think we all feel that there's an upside of having this kind of great collaboration models, because again, why should every biotech start building out own commercial infrastructures in 60, 70 countries in the world? It's just not cost efficient, also for the kind of, let's say, target markets that a lot of the drugs are going after. I mean, I don't know if you know the statistics, but the average kind of peak sale assumption for a drug these days is 700 to 800 million euro across everything. Yeah, so it's of course a little bit biased, but it's, you know, it just doesn't justify if you cannot leverage sales synergies. So that's an operational problem. At the same time, if we all think about our private lives, yeah, I mean, who wants to live in a country that has only 1 or 2 mobile phone providers? You know what I'm saying? No one wants that. Yeah, and I think the same is also true for investors, the same is true for pharma companies. So we need to have that healthy competition, because again, to the point that was made earlier, you'd also need competition that we push each other, right? That we really kind of also push the boundaries towards that next level of innovation. So long story short, I don't have the perfect answer here for you, but I think it's for me that boundary, but also here, I mean, I'm also an MBA by training. I would say let's trust the forces of the market. I mean, if you look at what happened after IRA was announced, we all were like, oh God, what is happening? Yeah. Now, kind of a year later, we all have adapted to the new reality. It's just like the frame has changed. And I think the same is happening with the FTC ruling, right? Do I like it that even the FTC unwinded the deal that Sanofi did with an Australian kind of cell therapy player? No. I don't understand really why they saw a concern, but they saw a concern, and it's their prerogative at the end to act on it. Yeah, so I would really just trust the system.
Right. Look, thank you. It's 1:30. Just very quickly, then, the biggest thing coming along in healthcare, in your view, just almost one sentence.
New modalities and treatments for neurodegeneration. It's a massive need, and I think there's some hope and optimism on the horizon there. And so, yeah, I think that'll be mine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I go with that. Neurology and immunology, I think we will see a lot of innovation coming up.
True.
So I won't pick an area, I'll pick something else. I'm hopeful that 10, 15 years from now we'll say, you remember the times when we as an industry told patients, the end user, what was good for them?
Tamsin?
I think for me, mine will be that we will see a complete blurring between consumer health, wellness, and traditional medicine.
Precision public health is one way of putting it. I agree with that. Well, look, thanks to the panel very much for coming. Thank you.